Once more, history reveals the downfall of a ruler. Henry VIII was once known as a strong and handsome king who changed the course of his country's history. But how did this powerful monarch end up in terrible pain and suffering at the end of his life? Have you ever wondered how a man who looked so perfect could fall so deeply into illness and misery? What caused Henry's body to fail him after years of ruling? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let's dive into the full story. Henry's final years were marked by pain, illness, and a sharp decline from the strong leader he once was. A serious accident in 1536, when he was 44 years old, changed everything. After that fall, Henry's health worsened quickly, and he suffered from wounds and diseases that never healed properly. This introduction sets the stage to explore the sad final chapter of a king who shaped English history, but was brought low by his own failing body. The story shows how even the most powerful people face the limits of life and health. In January of 1536, Henry VIII took part in a jousting tournament at Greenwich. At 44 years old, he was still a strong and brave king, but fate had other plans. During one of the matches, Henry's horse suddenly fell, causing the king to be thrown to the ground with great force. He remained unconscious for nearly 2 hours, a clear sign that the injury was very serious. This accident marked the beginning of Henry's decline. Though he survived, his right leg was badly hurt. The wound would not heal properly and soon turned into an open sore that caused him constant pain. This sore smelled so bad that people could notice Henry's presence by the terrible odor before they even saw him. The injury also affected Henry's mood and behavior. Some historians believe the fall caused damage to his brain, which made him more angry and suspicious. This was the time when Henry's rule became harsher and more unpredictable. The accident changed Henry's life in many ways. His health, his strength, and his personality all suffered, leading him down a dark path from which he never fully recovered. This moment was the start of the tragic final chapter of one of England's most famous kings. After the jousting accident in January 1536, Henry VIII's health began to worsen steadily. The injury to his leg turned into a serious problem that did not heal. Instead, it became an open sore that caused him great pain and discomfort. This wound made moving around difficult, and Henry's once strong body started to weaken. As time passed, the sore grew worse, and the smell became so strong that it was noticed by everyone around him. Courtiers and servants had to hide their disgust, as showing any sign of dislike could anger the king. This constant pain and humiliation took a heavy toll on Henry's spirit. Henry also began to gain weight quickly. From being a tall and athletic man, he grew very heavy and struggled to move without help. His waist size increased dramatically, and he needed a special pulley system to move from room to room in the palace. This change in his body made life much harder for him. The early signs of physical deterioration showed that Henry's condition was serious and likely to get worse. His body was no longer as strong as it once was, and the wounds and illnesses were beginning to control his life. This decline set the stage for the more difficult times that were still to come. The injury to Henry VIII's right leg did not heal and soon developed into painful ulcers. These sores were deep wounds that stayed open for a long time. They caused Henry a great deal of suffering every day. The ulcers were so bad that the bones in his leg could sometimes be seen through the broken skin. The smell coming from the wounds was terrible. It was strong enough to be noticed from several rooms away. This made Henry's presence difficult for others, even though they had to be polite and respectful. The king's pain and discomfort affected not only his body, but also his mind. Doctors at the time tried to help Henry using the medical knowledge they had, But many of their treatments actually made things worse. They used hot irons to burn the wounds, gave him medicines with dangerous substances like arsenic and mercury, and often took his blood in a way that weakened him further. Despite these treatments, the ulcers grew worse, and Henry's pain became almost unbearable. The chronic suffering changed his daily life, making it hard for him to move or even rest. These leg ulcers and the ongoing pain were a key part of the king's long decline before his death. Henry VIII's worsening health had a strong effect on his behavior and mood. The constant pain from his leg ulcers and other illnesses made him irritable and angry. People around him noticed that he became more paranoid and suspicious, often fearing that others wanted to harm him. Some historians believe that the injury to his head during the jousting accident may have caused changes in his brain. This could explain why Henry grew more quick to anger and more likely to accuse even his closest friends of betrayal. Henry's paranoia led him to make harsh decisions. He ordered the execution of many people he believed were plotting against him, including some loyal advisors and friends. This created fear and tension in the royal court, where everyone was afraid to speak freely. His illness also made him less able to take part in government and important decisions. The king's once strong leadership was replaced by mood swings and fits of rage. This change in behavior showed how much his health problems were affecting not just his body, but his mind as well. As Henry VIII's health worsened, he began to gain a great deal of weight. His waist, which had once been a normal size, grew to over 130 centimeters. This made it very hard for him to move around by himself. Because of his large size and weak legs, Henry needed help to get from one room to another. The palace even had to make doorways wider so that he could pass through. To move him safely, a special pulley system was designed to lift and carry him. Henry's diet also played a part in his weight gain. He ate large amounts of red meat and drank lots of wine and beer. There were very few vegetables in his meals, which made his health worse over time. These mobility problems made Henry more dependent on others and added to his frustration and sadness. The once active and athletic king was now trapped in a body that limited his freedom. This loss of independence was one of the many challenges Henry faced in his final years. Henry VIII's mental health suffered greatly as his physical condition worsened. The pain and illness caused him to become more fearful and suspicious of those around him. He started to believe that people were trying to harm or poison him, even when there was no real evidence. This growing paranoia made Henry act harshly. He trusted fewer people and often accused close friends and advisors of plotting against him. Many innocent people lost their lives because of his fear and mistrust. Some experts think that damage to Henry's brain from his earlier injury may have caused these changes in his mind. This made him unpredictable and sometimes violent, which frightened everyone at court. Henry's mental decline added to the sadness of his final years. Not only was his body failing, but his mind was also becoming troubled. This made his last days even harder for both himself and those who cared for him. As Henry VIII's health problems grew worse, it became harder for him to perform his duties as king. The pain from his leg ulcers and his heavy weight made it difficult to attend meetings or handle the responsibilities of ruling the country. Henry's constant suffering affected his decision-making. Sometimes, he was too weak or tired to focus on important matters. At other times, his anger and paranoia led to poor choices, including harsh punishments and executions. Because of his illness, Henry had to rely more on his advisors and trusted servants to manage the kingdom. This loss of control was frustrating for a king who had once been very powerful and active. His chronic illness also meant he spent more time resting and less time meeting with nobles or foreign leaders. This reduced presence weakened his influence and changed how the court operated during his final years. Overall, Henry's declining health had a major impact on how he ruled. showing how physical illness can affect even the most powerful leaders. During his final years, Henry VIII was married 2 more times, but these marriages were very different from his earlier ones. His 5th wife, Catherine Howard, was only 19 years old when they married, while Henry was much older and very sick. The difference in their ages and Henry's poor health made their marriage difficult and unhappy. Catherine Howard soon began an affair with one of Henry's courtiers. When Henry found out, he ordered both of them to be executed. This event added to the sadness and fear surrounding Henry's final years. Henry's last wife, Catherine Parr, was more like a nurse than a queen. She cared for Henry with kindness and patience as his health continued to fail. Catherine Parr stayed by his side and helped him through his last difficult months. Despite the attention from his wives and servants, Henry's suffering grew worse. The care he received showed that even a king needs help when faced with serious illness. These final years revealed Henry's vulnerability and the limits of his power. In the last years of Henry VIII's life, doctors tried many ways to treat his wounds and illnesses. However, medical knowledge at the time was limited, and some treatments actually made Henry's condition worse. Doctors used hot irons to burn his leg sores in an attempt to heal them. They also gave him medicines containing harmful substances like arsenic and mercury. These treatments caused more pain and damage instead of helping. Bloodletting was another common practice. This involved removing blood from the body, which was believed to balance the body's humors. Unfortunately, it only made Henry weaker and more tired. Because of these harmful treatments, Henry's health declined faster. His wounds grew worse, and he suffered greatly. The lack of effective medical care was a sad part of his final struggle. This shows how even kings were limited by the medical knowledge of their time, and how their suffering was sometimes increased by well-meaning but dangerous treatments. In the last months of his life, Henry VIII's health grew worse than ever before. He suffered from constant pain, especially in his legs where the ulcers had become very bad. The wounds caused infections that made him very weak and tired. Henry often had fevers and felt very sick. His breathing became difficult, and he sometimes became confused or dizzy. These symptoms made his daily life very hard and full of suffering. During this time, Henry also experienced moments of sadness and despair. He sometimes cried and thought about his past, including his deceased wives. These emotional struggles added to his physical pain. Despite all this, Henry tried to stay strong and keep his faith. He received visits from religious leaders who comforted him in his final days. The last months were full of suffering for Henry, showing the harsh reality of illness before modern medicine. His body was failing, and he faced death with both pain and courage. In the final days before his death, Henry VIII was very weak and unable to move without help. His body was swollen, and the ulcers on his legs had become worse, causing him great pain and a strong, unpleasant smell. Mentally, Henry was sometimes confused and restless. At times, he would talk quietly to himself, or mumble the names of his wives who had passed away. These moments showed his troubled mind as he faced the end of his life. Despite his suffering, Henry showed signs of faith. When asked if he died as a Christian, he squeezed the hand of the archbishop who was with him. A silent but clear answer. Henry's last days were filled with both physical agony and emotional struggle. His body was failing, but he faced his death with a mixture of fear, sadness, and quiet acceptance. This final stage marked the end of a powerful but troubled king's life. In the early hours of January 28, 1547, Henry VIII took his last breath. He was 55 years old. After years of pain and illness, the once mighty king finally passed away quietly in his bed. His death marked the end of an era for England. Henry's long reign had changed the country in many ways, from breaking away from the Pope to creating a new church. Yet, despite all his power, he could not escape the weakness of the human body. Those close to Henry waited quietly as he died. The archbishop who had been by his side during his final moments confirmed that Henry died in the Christian faith, bringing some peace to the troubled king's soul. Though his death was a relief from suffering, it also left England uncertain about the future. The powerful king was gone, and the country faced a new chapter without him. Henry VIII's passing was both a moment of sadness and hope, closing a dramatic story of strength, pain, and change. When Henry VIII died on January 28, 1547, the royal court was filled with a mix of emotions. Many felt sadness for the suffering king who had ruled for decades. Others were fearful about what would happen next, as Henry's strong leadership had kept the kingdom steady. Close friends and advisors were shocked, but also relieved that Henry's pain had finally ended. The king's paranoia and harsh rule had made life difficult for many at court, and some saw his death as the end of a troubled time. However, no one dared openly speak about the king's failing health before his death. English law forbade anyone from predicting or discussing the monarch's death, so everyone kept quiet out of fear of punishment. The news of Henry's death spread quickly, and preparations began for his funeral. The court had to handle the king's large and difficult body while maintaining respect for his royal status. The reactions at court showed how Henry's death was both a relief and a moment of uncertainty for those who had lived under his rule. After Henry VIII died, his body was very difficult to manage because of his size and poor health. He was much larger than most people, weighing over 180 kilograms. This meant that special arrangements had to be made to prepare his body for the funeral. The wounds on his legs and his swollen body had begun to decay quickly. The smell from his body was so strong and unpleasant that many people could hardly be near it. The process of embalming at the time was basic, involving the removal of internal organs and the use of herbs to mask the smell. Despite these efforts, the body began to leak fluids, which caused a terrible scene. This was a humiliating end for a king who had once been so powerful. This condition of Henry's body after death showed the harsh reality of his final years and the limits of medicine and care during that time. It was a sad and shocking end for one of England's most famous monarchs. Preparing Henry VIII's body for burial was a difficult task. Because of his enormous size and the condition of his wounds, the royal embalmers faced many problems. His body was swollen and decaying, which made it hard to handle and preserve. The embalming process in the 1500s was not very advanced. Embalmers removed some internal organs and tried to use herbs and spices to cover the smell, but this was not enough to stop the body from decomposing. A special coffin had to be made to hold Henry's large body. The usual coffins were too small, so carpenters built a bigger one that could fit him comfortably. During the days before the funeral, the coffin leaked fluids caused by the decaying body. This created a horrible smell and an embarrassing situation for the court. These challenges showed how Henry's physical decline continued even after death. The difficulties in embalming and coffin preparation were a reminder of the king's suffering and the limits of the time's burial practices. Henry VIII's funeral took place on February 16, 1547, nearly 3 weeks after his death. Despite the terrible smell coming from his body and coffin, the ceremony was held with great ceremony and respect for the king. The royal court gathered at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, where Henry was to be buried. The chapel was decorated for the occasion, and many nobles, clergy, and important figures attended the funeral. Henry was laid to rest beside Jane Seymour, the wife who had given him his only legitimate son, Edward VI. This was a fitting place for a king who had been so focused on securing his family's future. The funeral was a mix of sadness and honor. It marked the end of a powerful and sometimes feared ruler. Even though his final years were full of pain and suffering, Henry VIII was remembered for the changes he brought to England. The ceremony showed the respect that a king deserved, despite the harsh realities of his last days and death. Henry VIII's death marked the end of a dramatic chapter in English history. His reign changed the country forever, especially by breaking away from the Pope and starting the Church of England. These actions shaped the future of British religion and politics. Even though Henry suffered greatly at the end of his life, his political and religious decisions had long-lasting effects. His son, Edward VI, inherited the throne but ruled only for a short time. Then came Mary I, Henry's daughter, who tried to return England to the old Catholic faith. Finally, Elizabeth I, another daughter, brought a golden age and stability to the kingdom. Henry's personal story is a reminder that even the most powerful leaders are human and face the limits of their bodies. His painful death shows how illness and time affect everyone, no matter how strong they seem. The story of Henry VIII teaches us about the cost of power and the fragility of life. His death was not just the end of a king, but a turning point that shaped the future of England and the world.